Hey everyone, welcome back to TryHackMe's Advent of Cyber 2. I'm Dark, and today we're going to do Day 11, The Rogue Gnome. So Day 11. This is it, the moment that Elf McEager has been waiting for. It's the final exam of the MMAP course that he enlisted on during Day 8, What's Under the Christmas Tree. It looks like all that hard work of hitting the books has paid off. Success, Elf McEager screams. The exploit worked. Yippee! Elf McEager has successfully managed to create a reverse shell from the target back to his computer. Little did he know, the real exam begins now. The last stage of the exam requires Elf McEager to escalate his privileges. He spent so much time studying MMAP cheat sheets that now he's drawing a blank. Can you help Elf McEager? Getting started. So, as always, we're going to go ahead and deploy the attack box, which you can see that I've done over here, and then deploy the box attached to today's task. And you can click on that here. Today's learning objectives. Today we're going to be exploring the use of Nmap in our information gathering stage to build a picture of the services running on our computer and understand how these may be useful to us. We'll also be showing how Nmap scans will be detected and blocked by the use of firewalls. I think this is slightly wrong. I'll ping the creator for this day. I think this might be slightly off because today we're talking about PrivEsc. So today's learning objectives are actually going to be, we are going to explore what you can do in order to escalate your privileges once you have a shell on the remote system. Just because you can have a shell on the remote system, but it can be a really low privileged user. For example, a very common one is www data or, oh my goodness, just random generic users like that aren't going to be root. And realistically, we want to have full control over the remote system. Otherwise, what are we doing? And especially if you're going to go on and look at taking exams like the OSCP, part of your points that are assigned there are for your privilege escalation. And this is something that you're going to end up taking a lot of time to study. One quick note, a couple courses that I'm not necessarily directly affiliated with them, but I do strongly endorse taking them are Tiberius's PrivEsc courses. He has a couple rooms for them on TryHackMe, but they're also Udemy courses. And if you're looking to take the OSCP, those are pretty much invaluable. I mentioned that on my OSCP video, but definitely worth checking out. I believe the Cyber Mentor also has some privilege escalation courses, if I'm remembering correctly, and those are definitely worth checking out. He's an excellent teacher as well. If you're just going to pen testing, he's a general level course that I actually have gone through it before, specifically for a previous role that I was in, that I wanted to check it out and see if it was something that would be good for juniors to take. It is really good. So, but I digress. So what is privilege escalation? You may be surprised to find out the privilege escalation is something that you do daily. On computing system, there's a general rule of thumb that determines how someone interacts with the computer system and the resources within it. There are two primary levels of permissions that a person may have to a computer system. You have your user level, and then you have your administrator level. Generally speaking, only administrators can modify system settings or change the permissions of other user resources like files and folders. Users may be divided into roles such as within a company. Staff in HR are only able to access HR documents, whereas accounting staff are only able to access accounting resources. Privilege escalation is simply the process of increasing the current privileges we have to the permissions above us. In the screenshot below, we are escalating our privileges to administrator to run command prompts on Windows 10. So this is called the UAC. This is user account control. If you have a Windows computer, you've probably seen this about 1 million times. This is actually so that malware has a harder time escalating privileges. So the idea is that even if you want to run something on the command line and it requires administrator privileges, you need to either start the terminal running as administrator, which is going to prompt you something with something like this, or you're going to have a UAC pop up and the user is going to say, what the hell is going on? I'm not running anything. So yeah, you've probably seen a lot of these. OSX has something a little bit similar, but it's a permissions thing. And the pop-up fatigue on OSX is kind of an entirely different discussion. But it's just the route that Apple is going. Actually, Android is going that same way as well, for that matter. So normal process of privilege escalation. If you are in a corporate network, you've probably seen this and you can click yes, and you probably need an administrator password. If you are in a corporate network and you can click yes on this and you have administrator on your own computer, that's a problem. That's actually something that, as a penetration tester, I would be very excited if I got access to your system, because I will do bad things with that. But again, I digress. Typically, you're going to have to enter a password here, though, for an administrator account that wouldn't be yours. As a pen tester, we often want to escalate our privileges to that of another user or administrator to have full access to the system. This won't always be linear. Sometimes you need to go to another user on the system that might have slightly higher or just otherwise different permissions, because their permissions might be flawed in a different way. And we'll get into that in just a moment. We can discover and abuse misconfigurations or bugs within a system to escalate these privileges where this shouldn't otherwise be possible. The directions of privilege escalation. The process of escalating privileges isn't as clear-cut as going straight for a user through to administrator in most cases. Rather, slowly working our way through the resources and functions that other users can interact with. So we're going to take a look at these two types, horizontal and vertical. Horizontal privilege escalation attack involves the intended permissions of a user to abuse a vulnerability to access another user's resources who has similar permissions to you. So you're going from one person in a department to another. This is something that may be like a normal level employee, or one employee in one department to another employee in another department. You're not going up in permissions, you're going kind of sideways. For example, using an account with access to accounting documents to access an HR account or to retrieve HR documents, rather. Lost my place in the words. As the difference in the permissions of both the accounting and HR accounts is the data they can access, you aren't moving your privileges upwards. You're moving it horizontally among people on your level. A bit of a tongue twister here. And this can be a little bit confusing. Once you get used to it, it makes a lot more sense in practice. So vertical privilege escalation, this is more of what we traditionally think of. And again, a bit more traditional, a vertical privilege escalation attack involves exploiting a vulnerability that allows you to perform actions like commands or accessing data, acting as a higher privileged account, such as an administrator. Remember the attack you performed on day 1, A Christmas Crisis? You modified your cookie to access Santa's control panel. This is a fantastic example of a vertical privilege escalation because you were able to use your user account to access and manage the control panel. We're going from a low privileged account to a high privileged account. This control panel is only accessible by Santa, an administrator, or, well, usually an administrator. If you were looking at a traditional IT department, every user that is an administrator should have a normal level account and then a higher level account. So you have a normal user account for Santa as well, ideally, in this situation. So you're moving your permissions upward in this sense. And again, you're going from somewhere where you have similar permissions to another place that you have similar permissions for horizontal, and you're going up directly in vertical. Reinforcing the breach. A common issue we'll face in offensive pen testing is instability. The very nature of some exploits relies on a heavy hand of luck and patience to work. What we're doing are mistakes in processes. If any of you who have done the Blue Room, which I recommended at a previous day, that's something that exploit doesn't always work, and we do need a little bit of luck just to have it go through. And we've been talking about that here. Take, for example, the Eternal Blue exploit, which conducts a series of vulnerabilities in how Windows OS allocates and manages memory. As the exploit writes to memory in an improper way, there's a chance of the computer crashing, which happens. There are a lot of times where you're running an exploit that it's just going to crash the other computer. There is not the zero logon exploit, rather Bluekeep. There we go. That is a recent Windows vulnerability, and for those who are not familiar with it, Bluekeep was a vulnerability in RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, that came up in Windows 10 that allowed you to do very similar things to what Eternal Blue does, which is click to win. However, it's incredibly unstable. I know it's been getting better recently at the time of recording this, but you get a 50-50 shot, generally speaking, of crashing the computer that you're running it against. So it's usually more consistent as a denial of service attack. Which is something that, as pen testers, we don't really do denial of service attacks. It's not worthwhile. and very little merit. We'll showcase a means of stabilizing our connection in the section below, so I think we're going to talk about upgrading a shell. Let's exploit a local copy of DVWA, Damn Vulnerable Web App. Slight misspelling there. There's an entire room on this if you want to just play around with it outside of this. I have a sandbox room that I made just for funsies, and it was mostly because I needed to beat on this for a little while. And use a vulnerability called Command Injection to create a reverse connection to our device. Highlighted in red is the system command to utilize netcat to connect back to our attacking machine. So what we're using here is DVWA has a functionality within the web app that it will do a ping for our device. And you may think this might be useful. It might be something that comes up in a remote control panel for maybe you just have a little controller for your home network or a business network that you can say, hey, let's see if this device is up, and you could be able to ping it. However, we can actually inject a, don't need WAPalizer. For those who are wondering what that is, it's a little web analyzer thing up here that you'll use in web app hacking. And I realize now you couldn't see that pop up because it's covered as it should be. This is a reverse shell that we're sending ourselves with the nice version of netcat. There are two versions. One has this -e flag. One doesn't, and the one that doesn't is a little bit trickier to get a reverse shell from just because it's a different string and it's not as easy to remember. So what we can do is we can pretend that we're going to ping a device and we're just saying that we're going to run that command and this at the same time. And we can send ourselves a shell in that specific way. And this would be our address and then the port that we're sending it on. And we're executing the SH shell when we're doing that. Verifying a successful reverse connection, we execute two initial commands to get a bit of insight as to how we should progress. So here we can see we have a netcat listener that's waiting for this. We're receiving our connection, and then we're checking to see, it looks like we are www-data. And then we're just seeing what we are running for our shell. So executing the QMI command allows us to see what the name of the account that we are currently executing command is as, and then echo $0 informs us of our shell, and it's currently bin sh. You don't have to worry too much about this. This is a simple shell in comparison to bin bash, as we say right here. In shells like our current netcat, we don't have many luxuries such as tab completion and reselecting the last command executed using the up arrow, but importantly, we can't use commands that ask for additional input. So this is not interactive. With this, when I say not interactive, it means that if it wants us to prompt for something, we can't actually reply to that prompt. This is a input-output shell, basic one that we can send things to and we will get output from. But if we try to do anything too fancy, it will just freeze up and die. And a little bit of a pain in the butt. Modern Ubuntu installs come with Python 3 installed, and this is something you can generally count on. And we can spawn another shell and begin to make it interactive. This is called an upgrade sequence, and we'll go through that in just a moment. So here we can see we're running Python and we're running a single command. This allows us to run this as a one-liner. We're importing pty, which is the Python teletype library, I believe. And then pty.spawn, we're saying, hey, we want to spawn a new shell, and we're going to spawn a bash shell. Now note, having these quotes, the parentheses, and everything there, that is very important. Otherwise, this just won't work. So we can run that here, and you can see our prompt goes from just a simple prompt of nothing to what looks like a normal bash prompt, because it's bash now that we're working with. And here we can see if we echo that, we are running bash indeed. And there are many ways we can make our shell interactive if Python isn't installed, and we can take a look at that here in just a moment. This is a simple just list of different ways that we can upgrade our shells. And I do recommend going through and reading this. The cheat sheet down here at the bottom is what you really want. And we're going to be doing this little bit here. You thought enumeration stopped at mmap? Wrong! We were just getting started. After gaining initial access, it's essential to begin to build a picture of the internals of the machine. We want to figure out what the machine is used for. Ideally, if it's a normal workstation, if it's going to be maybe in a file server, something like that, or a print server. or maybe it's running Citrix or something else on it. We want to figure out what specifically it is. For those who aren't familiar with Citrix, that is a distributed desktop solution. You can essentially run, you can make individual applications like Word into apps. It's very cool, and it's something that you work with more in a corporate environment. It's very common to see. We can look for a plethora of information, such as other services that are running. This will give you an idea of what it's used for and what antivirus and other tech that they're running in the environment. Sensitive data, including passwords. This happens a lot. Executable scripts, binaries to abuse, and more. This is also something that happens a lot. Don't worry too much about being able to do this. I think we're going to do a little bit of in this task. This is something, abusing binaries and being able to look at what they're calling is a more advanced task, but it's something you get to eventually in your pen testing career. For example, we can use the find command to search for common folders or files that we may suspect to be on the machine. So we're going to be looking for backups. We're going to look for passwords. Using the grep command, we can look through every single file and see if there are passwords and see if those passwords furthermore are reused, because often enough, you'll just add the admin password that's reused for everything. We can look for admin. This is pretty typical of finding configurations and then config files. Very, very common to see, especially with websites. You can find .configs and they'll have database passwords in them. And well, usually that database password is something that's pretty useful. And if we can't get, if the database password isn't reused, then we can get to the database and start getting even more information from that. Our vulnerable machine in this example has a directory called backups containing SSH key that we can use for authentication. This is super nice because it gives us a very nice shell. This was found via find. We're going to start at the root directory of the system. So we're going to look at every folder on the system. And then we're going to specify our name of ID_RSA, which means it's a private SSH key. And then we're going to forward any errors to the bin bucket or the bit bucket dev null. This just won't display them on screen. Let's break this down. So we're using the find command to search the volume. Yeah, we went through that. Can you think of any other files or folders we may want to find? This is a really good one to look for. We want to look for those config folders. You can find passwords, passwords.txt, notes.txt, anything in your user's public directory, especially if you're on a system as a normal user. Look in their desktop, look in the documents folder. If you can, look in, you can pull saved passwords from Firefox and things like that and do all sorts of nasty things. And there's a lot of fun things that you can do with this further on. The Prevast checklist. As you progress through your pen testing journey, you will begin to pick up a certain workflow for how you approach certain stages of an engagement. Whilst this workflow is truly yours, it will revolve around some fundamental steps in looking for vulnerabilities for privilege escalation. Determining the kernel of the machine is typically your first step. This is going to give you opportunities for kernel exploitation such as dirty cow. If this is something you're not necessarily familiar with, I recommend looking this up. It's a very, very famous Linux kernel exploit. This will give you an idea if you've got potentially an easy win. This is usually your last resort running one of these because you've got a decent chance that you're going to crash the system or just put it at a very, very unstable state by running one of these. Locating other services running or applications installed that may be abusable, so SUIDs, which we're going to talk about in a bit, or otherwise out-of-date software. Look at what's on the user's desktop and look at what's running, and what's running is root. That's usually, or what's running as another user even. It's going to give you a lot. Looking for automated scripts such as backup scripts, exploiting cron tabs, also very common. This will come up in automated Prevast scripts. Credentials, so user accounts and application config files, as I mentioned before, reuse passwords. Misconfigured file and directory permissions. This is something that gets screwed up a lot. Chmod777 is a very easy fix to make an application work, but it's not secure. Check out some checklists that can be used as a cheat sheet for the enumeration stage of privilege escalation. Got Milk, who is, he's one of the offensive security guys. Very, very cool. Very smart guy. This is something that I recommend going through. It may not make the most sense the first time through. Read it a couple times. This is a very comprehensive checklist. Pay2, I'm not familiar with. Payload All the Things is a fantastic resource as well. I recommend checking those out. Vulnerability SUID 101. So for today's training material, we're going to be showcasing the resource that is GTFO bins, and we'll take a look at that in just a little bit, to escalator privileges, in explaining how the misconfigured permissions of applications can be exploited to escalator privileges to an administrator. Firstly, this begs the question, what is an SUID exactly? Well, let's get on the same page by detailing how permissions work in Linux exactly. A benefit of Linux is its granularity in file permissions. They are, however, rather intimidating to approach. When performing commands such as ls-tac-l to list the permissions of our current directory, we get this output. And you can see that we have our file owner. So this is the user owner, and this is the group owner that owns the file. And here we can see if something is maybe a directory, so this is user, group, and then everyone else. So it looks like the owner of this can read and write, and then make these things executable. I believe that means something different for directories. I can't remember off the top of my head. We can see everyone else can read and write to the file in the same group, rather, and anyone else on the system can read these files. So those are world readable. And if these have anything sensitive in them, that's not good. However, it looks like those are empty here for the sake of this demonstration. And you can see the output here. Our directory has 3 directories, example dir 3, and 3 files, example file 3. I've listed the columns of interest here. So, and this is something I walk through. Again, this is the specific permissions. We have our user ownership, group ownership, file size, and then last modified date. And it'll go through that a little bit here. There are some other permissions, specifically there are sticky bits and other things like that. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, I believe. So at the moment, the example files are not executable. As you can see, there's no X here. There would be an X on these files if the files were exactly, or absolutely, rather, executable. And we'll go ahead and glaze past that since I talked about all that. Normally, executables and commands are just shortcuts to executables, will execute as the user who is running them, assuming they have the file permissions to do so, making sure that we have that execute bit enabled for us. This is why some commands, such as changing a user's password, require sudo or sudo in front of them. The sudo allows you to execute something with the permissions as root, so your most privileged user. Users who can use sudo are called sudoers and are listed in etc sudoers. We can use this to help identify valuable users to us as well. I believe this file is world readable, which is very nice for us. Or I believe you can only view this file rather if you have sudo permissions to list the permissions itself, if I remember correctly. We'll do our quick check with this. It's sudo tac-l to see if what you can actually run specifically. SUID is simply a permission added to an executable that does a similar thing as sudo. However, instead, it allows users to run the executable as whoever owns it, as demonstrated below. So it looks like we have 3 examples, example 1, 2, and 3. The file owner is root. If we're CMNATIC and we're running this file, we will run it as root, and then so on and so forth. It's going to be run as whoever the file owner is on this side. Suddenly, the introduction of SUID, users no longer have to be a sudoer to run an executable as root, and you don't need a password to do this as well. So these can be abused pretty heavily. Sometimes these can be pretty locked down, but it's pretty easy to get this wrong on a dev end. And it's just because they're kind of complicated. Learning about these vulnerabilities can be from a dev end, not necessarily from a pen test end. This can be legitimately used to allow applications that specific privileges or require specific privileges to run that another user doesn't have or can't have. Abusing SUID. So we're going to abuse this with that site we were looking at earlier, GTFO bins. Now that we understand why executables with this SUID permission are so enticing, let's begin to learn how to find these and how and understand the capabilities we can do with some of these executables. At the surface, SUID isn't inherently insecure. It's only when you factor in the misconfiguration of permissions, and given the complexity on Linux, it's very easy to do this. Administrators don't adhere to the rule of least privileges when troubleshooting as well. Often enough, it's, like I said, it's just easier to run everything as root. And yes, it makes things work, but oh man, that creates a security issue. And this is referencing the principle of least privileges. That rule is that as a user, you give the user the minimum that they need to do their job effectively, or you don't give them full admin because they don't need full admin. And even if they argue they need full admin, they don't. From a security hazard standpoint, giving users full admin is kind of a death wish. And while some people will get a little bit they'll try to get into a fight over that, it's something that widely is agreed upon by the security community that it is a bad idea. Executables that are capable of interacting with the operating system, such as reading and writing files or creating shells, are gold mines for us. Thankfully, GTFObuttons is a website that lists a majority of applications that do such actions for us. Let's set the SUID on CP, the copy command that is used to copy files with. So you can see that we're using chmod u+s, which is the SUID command, and then we're adding that to the copy command here. Note how the CP executable is owned by root. So since the root user owns it, now when we run CP or copy, we're going to be running it as a super user whenever we do it, because this is our copy binary that is in our path by default. And here you can see again, that's confirming that it is owned by root, both for the user and then the group. And it is executable here too. The CP command will now be executed as root, meaning we can copy any file on the system. Some locations may be of interest to us, so copying the contents of another user's directories, for example, bash history, SSH keys, user.txt if you're looking for flags, copying the contents of the root directory, so for example, the root.txt, or Etsy password and Etsy shadow for password cracking. Let's confirm this by using the find command to search the machine for executables with the SUID permission set. So this is a command that you'll often use during privilege escalation. It's going to look for anything that has the SUID bit set. This is something that Tiberius covers pretty heavily in his course, specifically on Linux privilege escalation. And here you can see that, sure enough, our copy command comes up in here. And now using the CP command to copy the contents of root into our current directory, we can just see that now we have the flag here, which we shouldn't be able to do unless it specifically is intended here. Introducing enumeration scripts, so doing the legwork for us. Fortunately for us, there are many enumeration scripts available to use that automate some of the enumeration processes for us. We can download these onto our own machine and use a few methods to upload them on our vulnerable instance. Bear in mind that vulnerable instances that you deploy on TryHackMe do not have internet access, so the majority of the time they won't have internet access. There's a way that you can configure them to have internet access, but generally speaking, 99% of the machines that you find will not have that. So we must use our own machine that is connected to the TryHackMe network. A great script that is essential to anyone's toolkit is Linenum, that is available for download here. This is something that I believe is on Kali by default as well. I've actually migrated to using a different enumeration script, and we'll go into that here in just a little bit. I'll show you guys it just as an example. Linenum enumerates the target machine for us, detailing and collecting useful information such as kernel versions, permissions to any executables, or files that are outside of the user's home directory, and a whole plethora more. They do a lot of information gathering for us, and it ultimately becomes an issue of making sure that you can understand each section of it. The problem with this, it's easy to get lost within it, and this is something that's very true. Enumeration scripts often return lots of information that is often not all that useful to us. It's important to understand how these enumeration scripts work, as not to rely on them. However, these scripts make privilege escalation that much more approachable for beginners. So we can go ahead and download the Linenum script to our own machine using wget. And in this case, I'm going to go a little bit wild. We're going to use linpiece instead in my case, just because I find that it's a little bit better. And I think as beginners, you guys are going to enjoy it a little bit more. and then we can go ahead. So once we've got that downloaded, we can use Python 3 to turn our machine into a web server and serve the linenum.sh script to be downloaded. So make sure you're running this command in the same directory that you downloaded linenum.sh to. This is a Python simple web server. We can essentially just list our directory from that. Very cool. Is it potentially a security hazard? Absolutely. So we run this for however long you need to. And typically I recommend running this in an uploads directory that has nothing but what you need to upload in it. We need to upload this to the vulnerable instance, and we'll go over all this here in just a little bit, whilst ensuring that our own device is connected to the TryHackMe network. There are many ways that this can be done, which will depend on the vulnerable instance you are attacking, and the vulnerable instance may not have tools such as wget, so alternatives will need to be used. There are PowerShell alternatives for this. There's a bunch of one-liners. There's a whole bunch of ways you can do file transfers to the other machine. Navigate to a directory that we have write permissions to. So for the temp directory, it's pretty common to have write permissions to this. Many corporate networks will block this, so just be aware of that. So if it's not working to a temp directory, there are some other directories you can throw it in. Just be aware of that. Sometimes the temp directory may be writable and not executable, which is also a pain in the butt. And here we can see that we're using wget on the remote instance to grab the file off of our web server, and then we just have it there and ready. You can also do this with netcat using just file transfers. So you can see that we have netcat listen, and then we are going to take whatever receive on this and then chuck it into this file called linenum.sh. And then on our own machine, we're going to use netcat to throw linenum into that. So pretty cool. File transfers, I'm going to glaze over that pretty quickly just because I'll demonstrate it here in a minute anyways. Add the execution permission to linenum, so you need to use chmod plus x. You can do this with the numbers as well, plus x is just easier, and you can make it executable that way. And then we'll go ahead and run it, and you can see that we get a bunch of pretty feedback, or pretty colors and information back. Covering our tracks. The final stages of penetration testing involve setting up persistence and covering our tracks. For today's material, we'll detail the latter as it is not mentioned nearly enough. During a pen testing environment, you will want to try to avoid detection from administrators and engineers of your client, wherever within the permitted scope. This depends. A lot of times you won't really care about being caught, especially if you want to test your defenders and help them out to detect signatures like that. So just be aware of this. This isn't usually true. Activities such as logging in, authentication, uploading and downloading files are logged by services and the system itself. One thing to be aware as well, cleaning up and getting rid of a bunch of logs can also land you in hot water. Don't do this. This is something that specifically I'm mentioning as whenever you're doing incident response, or if you expect to do a purple team where the blue team will try to discover traces of actions that you've taken, destroying logs or altering logs is disruptive and not good. Now, are there certainly times where you want to do this? Yes, but they are very few and far between, so take this section with a grain of salt. On Debian and Ubuntu, the majority of these are left within the var log directory and require administrative privileges to read and modify. And again, that's for integrity of the system. Some log files are of interest, so you can see the auth log, and we can in this we can see attempted logins for SSH. Very interesting. This is often, if you are running a sim, this is going to be sent to that because this file is very interesting for that. Then we have Syslog, which is going to give us firewall events. Also very, very interesting. So scans and things like that. Varlog service, which is going to give us different service logs in here. And we can see specifically we have the Apache 2 directory. And that'll give us our access log. That's just a typical web log directory. And so on and so forth. Again, don't delete these in a pen test. Don't do it. Don't do it. That's very bad. Unless you are otherwise explicitly directed to, don't do this. All right, and then for the challenge. So ensure that you've deployed the instance attached to this task and take note of the IP address. So this is my IP address that I'm going to be attacking. Make sure that you attack yours, not necessarily mine. Answer question number 1 and number 2 before proceeding to log into the vulnerable instance. You've already been provided with the credentials to log into the vulnerable machine in question 3, and then apply our newfound knowledge from this task to escalate your privileges. Study the hints carefully if needed, Everything to complete this day has been discussed throughout today's task. All right, so we're going to go ahead and pause for just a moment. When we come back, we're going to go ahead and do the challenge. If you want to attempt it on your own for now, I recommend pausing here and then coming back if you get stuck, or if you want to see how I do this challenge. Again, I'm going to use linps, which is a different enumeration script. I like it a lot better, and it's just what I specifically use. I found that Linenum is a little bit dated, but it still works very, very well. So we're going to go ahead and pause for just a bit, and once we come back, we will go ahead and go through this. All right, and we're back. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. What type of privilege escalation involves using a user account to execute commands as an administrator? That is going to be vertical. What is the name of the file that contains a list of users who are part of the sudo group? And that is going to be sudowars. There we go. And that's going to be an etc sudowars. And then we're going to go ahead and log into our vulnerable virtual machine. We'll go ahead and do that now. And get that up. Actually, I'm going to use tmux here. SSH cmnatic at 10.10.167.203, and make sure that you're typing your IP for that, not mine. And then AOC 2020. Awesome. We'll give it just a moment. And we've been able to log in. And just for funsies, sudo -l. There we go. And we'll do AOC 2020. And it looks like we can't run sudo. Interesting. Sudo -l is my first check for privilege escalation, just something you want to do. In this specific case, actually, let me go ahead and pull it up on this machine. We can go ahead and transfer the enumeration script. And it looks like we don't have it in our directory, so we'll go ahead and search for linps, maybe. And I don't want to log into Google. Okay, I agree. We'll pull this up. And if you're doing this on the free one, you will not have internet access. This is something that you can transfer on. You can just copy it in using the old copy paste there. We'll go ahead and accept cookies. We're going to go to raw and Control A, Control C, minimize that, and open up a new tab. Victor uploads, cd uploads, nano linps.sh. We'll paste that in, and we'll give it a moment because it pastes a lot in. And this is going to give us back pretty colors as well. Maybe not because I'm using tmux, but still very useful all the same. And it looks like it copied in. Maybe. There we go. Takes a second. And we'll save it. And there we go. And if we do less on that, you can see that it's copied it all in. Cool. And we're going to go ahead and do Python -c or -m. Let's see. I believe it's http.server, and we'll do it on port 80. Maybe. Oh, already in use. Okay. We'll go ahead and do one on 8080. Okay. There we go. So now we can go ahead and hop back over here. I'm going to do wget http 10.10.179.221. And we're going to go ahead and grab linps.sh. And we are going to output. Actually, I believe that should just download it. Oh, 8080. There we go. And now if we do less linps, you can see that it downloaded all that. Now we'll go ahead and make that executable. I did this just in cmnatic's home directory just because I know I can write to it since I'm logged in as that user, and I have a very nice shell because we're just using SSH login here. So we'll go ahead and make that executable. I'm going to clear the screen with Control L, and we're going to run linps.sh. And we'll just let it run. It'll take a little bit, and it should give us a firm path to go ahead and exploit this. We'll give it a moment. And then while we're doing that, I'll go ahead and look at GTF opens. So this is just a number of ways that we can escalate our privileges on the system. I will go ahead and I'll run the menu command as well, which is what linpeas is doing. We're going to be looking at SUID binaries, which if we click on this, we can automatically filter it down to that and see that there are quite a few that if we have an SUID bit set, we can do very bad things on the system. So we can see that this is still running. We'll just go ahead and let it do its thing. I'm going to scroll up and see if we have our output that we want, though. As I believe it's right at the top for this. If not, we'll have it pretty soon. And you can see that it's just done a whole lot of automated looking for us. And this is all stuff that we want to look at typically. And you'll see that different things are highlighted. We'll scroll up. It's doing... yeah, I didn't find it quite yet. So we'll give it just a moment on that. We can also do this manually with the SUID command that's up here. This is effectively what it's doing anyways. We'll go ahead and grab that. And here we go. So this is the command that we're going to want. This is looking for SUID binaries. So fun stuff. We'll give it just a second here. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in there. And now it's on our clipboard. We'll go ahead and open this up in another directory. And we are going to SSH it again, just because that's already running. And now we can go ahead and paste in that SUID find command. It looks like we got some interesting things on that. So we'll go ahead and scroll up. And we're going to see which one we can abuse here. Looks like a lot of interesting things. SUID on ping, that should not be good. We have an SUID binary set on bash. Okay, that's probably not good. Cool. Here, 1 second. We're going to go ahead and pause. I'm going to check something to make sure that I do this the intended way, and we'll be right back. Alright, looks like there's a couple ways to do this. I will go over the bash method specifically because that is what I noticed right away. So we saw that within our tmux temp over here that bash has an SUID bit set, and we can go back over here. I've gone ahead and already run this so you can see that I'm root. However, if I exit, you can see I'm back at CMNATIC. We can escalate our privileges now in a very, very easy fashion by doing bash-p. And we can see now we are root. We got that from the GTFO bins here, and I'll make this a little bit bigger for you guys because otherwise it's going to be hard to read. This is the SUID section. You can just run this bit here of bash-p, and it's going to go ahead and escalate you pretty easily. So nice and simple. This is a pretty easy one, and it's something that GTFO bins can take a little bit to get used to. I recommend looking around. Look at some of the sudo tacl abuses, and you can have a lot of fun with that. I recommend taking a look at some of the other ones here and see if you can escalate them maybe a couple other ways. So since we are root, we're going to go ahead and cat root flag.txt. We'll go ahead and copy that out. Maybe. Because I really don't want to type that out. That looks like a lot of not fun to type. We'll grab that. And there we go. That is going to do it for day 11. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to hop in the TryHackMe Discord, which I have in the description below. Otherwise, have fun playing around with this machine, and I will see you guys. Actually, I won't see you guys tomorrow. John is going to be doing tomorrow. Keep an eye out on Twitter. We will have the videos linked, and they'll probably be in the media chat as well within the Discord. So I will see you guys when I see you next.